Professor Gavor. This is the last chapter of the McKean book, and we're talking about information delivery and IT's changing role. A lot of this we've already talked about also. We've talked about the amount of information that is just overwhelming today, the amount we generate. We talked about the average knowledge worker spends a quarter of their day searching for information. Well, if we talk about data analysts and whatnot, they spend all their time trying to cipher through the mountain range of data that we have. And if properly mined the data that we want and then properly manipulated and analyzed, that information generated can have considerable value. So it's already a proven fact that good information management practices and excellent systems can provide a strong, deliver fine financial performance. So it's the information that's embedded in workflows that is valuable. And all information in the ERP is information from workflows. We transform this tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge, or what I call raw data, into actionable information, results in what they're calling structural capital. Financial accountability legislation, which we're all aware of, from the early 2000s, from the Great Recession, has driven the need for greater information integrity and management of that information. And everything that we do now in business are new, we employ apps and technology and methodologies to make the workflows easier and less human intensive. The more we do that, the more data we generate and the more new information we have to try to cipher through. So we've talked about business dashboards. If you're talking about metrics and how many metrics you have to drive your business, many ERP systems now will create a dashboard almost tailored to a specific kind of executive. And it'll have all the daily, weekly, monthly measures and annual measures, I suppose, that an executive needs to see to evaluate the nature of the operation that they're managing. And secondarily, when you have questions about why did a metric go up or down, with a click, you should be able to dig down and find out more information. In other words, if sales were down at our stores, yesterday for some reason, and you want to find out why, you should be able to make a click or two and look at all the regional data. So you can isolate it to region. Yes, there was tornadoes in blah, blah, blah region of the country, and therefore, gee whiz, surprisingly, no one went to the store. I would anticipate sales would pop up today as people had to go out and buy things that might have been destroyed and or buy some staples that they think they might need. So you could look at it by, you could slice it and dice it and find out where, answer your own question without having to make any phone calls. And then actually call the right people to find out specifically what happened if it's still not clear. Of course, e-commerce has taken off like crazy, and e-commerce has taken off not because of the internet, but because of smartphones. And anybody can order anything they want almost at any time of the day or night. And a large majority of that, of course, from Amazon. So what they're saying here is that these modes of business have forced organizations to make sure their internal data is clean, make sure that all the information is correct and in the right place at the right time so that people can buy, so their customers can actually access their online store and buy whatever it is they want to buy. So the internet has basically enabled efficient transactions, expanded supply chains, and offer new services. Now, even saying that in this day and age, order something from Amazon and then go to another website and try to order the same kind of product, the experience most likely won't be as good. Almost all other websites that I play around with are a little bit wonky compared to Amazon. Also, you have this idea of internal self-service. So how is, if you're online inside the company, you should be able to answer any question that's data oriented. You should have access to all the data that you need to make decisions inside the company. Of course, they don't give all the data to all the people. So we have portals for all kinds of online self-service and making administration possible. You don't have to fill out a form. You don't have to go down to HR if you get married. You can go to the HR website and say that you've added a dependent, or if you have a child or something like that, just making changes of those natures. You move, you can change your address. All of those things. That's personal interaction with the company, but also your business interaction can be the same thing. There's the internet and there's the intranet. The intranet being inside the company. How do you resolve things? How do you place orders? How do you do things with inside the company so that your suppliers can provide you with what you need at the time you need it, internal suppliers, and that in turn you can deliver the output that you need to deliver to your internal customers. When we talk about unstructured data, we talked about this a little bit already. We're talking about emails and Twitter and photos and all of those kinds of things, which makes sense if you have a cell phone, a smartphone that has all of those things on it. But even right now, if you look at Microsoft Outlook and the whole Microsoft suite of products online, and I was to go in and search for the name of one of you students, it should be able to simultaneously show me any of the transaction types we've had. It could show me all the emails that we've exchanged. It could show me any meetings that we've had together. It can show me, give me reference to Microsoft's team pages where we may have collaborated on files and shared OneDrive files and all of those things. So this unstructured data that's not transactional data can also be managed very well. So IT must now develop, I think they've already developed or are evolving that development of taxonomies, the categorization for navigating and accessing this unstructured information. And it makes sense that if you keep your entire unstructured data in a Microsoft environment or an iOS environment, you should be able to search it and organize it more easily. Business intelligence, we've talked about this already too, includes both data mining and external competitor information. What you're trying to do is make sure that you understand, you can go and collect all the data you need, slice, dice, refine it, do regression on it, do whatever statistical analysis you have to do, display it through graphics in a variety of different ways, and then transform it into information that you can use to help draw conclusions or actually make important decisions. So the data warehouse technologies, taking this transactional data and having it in a database that everybody can access, and it's not part of the actual transactional processes of the company at that point. It's a warehousing of the data that you've already generated. Is an important thing to do. Behavior change. Well, what are we talking about here? ERPs have allowed us to have more sophisticated metrics and scorecards because all the data is there. There was a time when most of the metrics were financial because those were those were the data and information that we tracked and stored from general ledger through the financial statements. The entire accounting process of business was designed to make sure that we could manage money well. These non-financial measures like on-time and complete orders were harder to access. I mean, there was a time when if you needed to do that, you had to actually go through file cabinets of paper orders and look at each order and find out if the order, what was ordered and what was delivered, and determine your percent complete orders for a particular month. And if you have thousands and thousands of orders, that was a hard thing to do. So people didn't measure it all that often until all of a sudden all that information, instead of being in a file cabinet, is processed in your ERP system and offloaded into a data warehouse where with a few keystrokes, all of a sudden you're able to access that information. Effective information delivery. Well, if we're talking about supply chains, and one thing I always say, the mantra I always use, the job of the supply chain is to have the right product in the right place at the right time in the right quantities at the right quality to make sure that any customer order is fulfilled. The job of information architects, information analysts, data analysts, is to make sure the right data is available at the right time in the right place, kind of in the right format, so that a data analyst can take it and reformat it even some more and answer any questions and guide executives to better decisions. So they say careful information integration is a challenge, but once you have an ERP system, and if you're using the same ERP system globally, it's not as nearly the challenge it used to be. So there's other things that you have to look at, things maybe outside your company. Political judgment, for example. And so you have to have these new skills. You have to know what is it political judgment, in governments? No, it's political judgment within inside the company. It's how to do the information analysis. What are the workflow analyses? What are the information access? Who has it, who doesn't? What are the rules for the use of information? There's that I think we talked about the need to know. If you need to know it, if you need to be able to use the data, you should have it. If you don't, you should probably not have access to it. How usable is the data? And information navigation. What's missing here is, information analysis. There's a lot of database organization involved there. There's a lot of data cleansing, which is not here, because in 2015, people didn't realize that probably 30 to 60% of a data analysis of a data analysis project involved cleaning the data. And it wasn't as clean as you might think. Now, if I have 10 rows of data, I can look at it and say, oh, this data is missing, this data looks out of place. I can resolve it pretty quickly. But if I have millions and millions of lines of data, I have to have a better methodology. I can't go through it line by line, number by number. I have to figure out some way to use applications, functionality in either Python or R to be able to clean the data and find out where there's holes. Who owns the data? How is it administered? Where are you going to store it? so all these things, documenting, indexing, searching, personalization, multilingual presentations. I don't know how many people use Google Translate when you need to translate something just to get a rough idea of what they're saying. Business communications are probably easier to translate than other things. So, the other thing we talked about, unstructured contacts, we talked about network and server information system, and team collaboration software. Team collaboration software is Microsoft Teams. It's OneDrive where you have shared files. It's Google Docs. Network and server infrastructure for information hosting and staging. That happens behind the scenes. Most of you that aren't in IT will take that for granted. Getting the unstructured content, we already talked about how staying within a Microsoft or a Google environment, you can do that. So information delivery. You want to capture, you want to organize, you want to process, you want to maintain the data, and it's an ongoing process. Many companies have something called a data management department, and they've developed data management protocols to make sure that the integrity of the data is there. And it's an ongoing job. I think companies have generally gotten better at it, but I will tell you, there's always going to be misinformation in the million lines of code or data that you download. So capture includes all activities in identifying information for possible use. You may digitize documents, photos, whatever is required. You might even capture external business intelligence information or track the weather to see if you're ever going to correlate, is weather affecting our sales. You want to organize it. So when we talk about this, it's really the slicing and dicing, how you organize all of your data. And how do you index it? How do you classify it? How do you link sources together? This all happens in R and Python. You can bring National Weather Service data with your own sales data by region and then do your correlation studies to find out, is there a relationship between warm weather and the sales of our product? Maybe it's a product that warm weather makes you generate more sales of. Maybe it's a product where warmer weather diminishes the sales, like you sell furnaces. So the warmer the weather, the less furnaces you're going to sell. So the taxonomy creation is a systematic categorization by keyword or term. So it's like, the taxonomy you learned in biology. And you want to facilitate how easy it is to access for people that need to access it and make sure that people that shouldn't be accessing it can't. The process. You want to leverage the value of the information and information delivery technologies. It involves vast amounts, we're talking about piles and piles of data into what they're calling structural capital, but which I call actionable, so they use the information how I use the word data, and they use structural capital for the way I talk about actionable information that is valued by business people. And then you want to maintain all of this. How do you maintain the data? How do you retain it? How do you preserve it? And eventually, how do you dispose it? Do I want to keep transactional customer service transaction data for more than I'm required by law? Maybe, but I don't know, going back to the year 2010, if I'm going to really be able to learn anything by analyzing customer service data that far back. I generally have the dashboard and KPI data that we can see long-term trends, but I don't know that I need to go back to 2010 and do an analysis of why customer service went down in June 2010 and then went down in July and then back up in August. There's no need for that. So we want best practices certainly involved in this information delivery system. It's one of those continuous improvement projects where you want to get better at it and better at it over time. So you want to, and like I said before, you want to separate the data from the function to create greater flexibility. What does that mean? You want your functional data is what's in the ERP system, and the transactional. I need this data to make a decision, for this order, or this data is tied to this order, and the order is pending, and it's an active data amount. It's functional. It's happening. If you separate that, once it becomes historical, you want to warehouse it, but you want to keep it in its raw stages. Here's the original order. Here's the modified order. After you've done a credit check, here's a modified order after we found out and did an inventory check, and here's finally went out and delivered in a truck. You want that whole sequence of activities retained so that you can analyze it and find out where, if you need to improve customer service, where in that entire process you're having problems. You can buy data models and enhance them. This will save many person years of effort. I think right now we're looking at ways of doing that in Python, and people create basically what used to be called subroutines or Python programs that if they find out there's some value in it inside the company for slicing and dicing the data and making decisions, that you retain it and run it on a regular basis and make it a production run in the data warehouse. So they talk about middleware to translate data from one system to another if you're really transferring it from one system to another. But I think these modern programs that were just coming on the forefront back when this book was first published, so it was 2015, they were probably wrote it in 2014, 2013. I think more and more we have these programs, these open source programs like R, which is mostly statistics, and Python, which is mostly data analytics, but there's a tremendous overlap. They both integrate data into its own form and format from data warehouses of several different sources. So you want to get to a real-time single source customer information file. I would think most companies in ERP systems have that already. If not, they're probably behind the times. And we want to design information delivery, whether it's internal, external, customers, suppliers, whoever it may be, and you want to reduce that internal infighting, because I think a lot of that silo mentality came from the fact that I was keeping my information confidential to my own functional area instead of sharing it with everybody so everybody can see all the blemishes in every department as they needed to see them. The Internet of Things. Everything is connected to the internet. So not only your transactional data, all the data possible in your company is floating around there in your Ethernet, in your internal intranet of your company. And how do you control all this data? Some of it is from your ERP system, some of it is not. How do you organize it all and take advantage of it? If we talk about network-centric operations, it says it will soon be possible to collect, create, distribute, exploit information across any platform. This will be enabled by sensor grids, high-quality information, value-added command and control processes. I suppose that's true. I think most of the time we can integrate it now. That's what data architects and data scientists and data analysts all do. We want self-synchronizing systems. So, I mean, what we're talking about here, and we started talking about it earlier in the year, information will support. We want ERP systems to do the heavy lifting. You want transactions to go through untouched by human hands, and the only time humans should be involved is when there's an exception and the machine is not quite sure, the coding in the machine is not quite sure what to do with the information as presented. Then it's an exception, then you want human beings to be involved. I view those as a defect. You want to reduce the number of defects in your system, the number of defective transactions A good transaction is one, a high quality transaction is when it flows through the system and untouched by human hands and is just executed. Voila, you've minimized the number of people needed for that transaction. You can get the maximum profit from that sales transaction. Assume it's a sales transaction. If it needs to be touched by human hands, you probably want to track it, and you want to start then analyzing why are the reasons? What are the main reasons for humans having to intervene in a transaction process? And then eliminate the root causes of that. So it ends up being, I don't know if it's self-synchronizing necessarily or feedback loops. I imagine with AI you can do some of that, but again, the promise of AI is not where I think it really. I've been hearing about the promise of it for 30 years, and it hasn't really fulfilled all that yet. Informal information management. Well, I think this needs to be defined more. At least it needs to be defined more for me. And I think data scientists can look at some of that, and maybe it's unstructured data, I think is what I would call it at this point, and figure out how to integrate it into their knowledge management system. But also, it has to do with there's never a substitute for being well read in your industry. Systems don't know what the new trends are. They don't know what the new strategic bent is of your closest competitor. They don't know that there's a COVID-19 pandemic hitting and everybody's working from home. You know that as a human being, that's where our intelligence combined with machine intelligence can be useful. So I would say in the entire history of business is probably right. It's only recently that businesses have discovered the power and potential of information within all the systems that IT kind of looks at. We can now analyze, access that information as cheaply as ever. I can consolidate it globally with a push of a few buttons. And we're trying to use that information to look at things like we've never looked at it before and provide insights and therefore value to the organization. Thank you very much. And thank you for listening to this last lecture. See you in another course, hopefully.